Next in our lineup, put your hands together for Dr. Chester Wilson.
Hello, Elevate Daytona. My name is Chester Wilson, and tonight I'm going to be talking with you about mental health in the African American community. Hit it, Maestro. Mental health in the African American community is not a new phenomenon. In fact, we've seen it played over our televisions, we see it highlighted over social media, and it's just in front of our faces every single day. Before we can understand mental health, we first have to define it. So we look at it as a behavioral health disorder. It is a combination of either mental health or substance abuse disorders that affect how we live and how we operate every day in society. Some of the most common mental health disorders that we look at: post-traumatic stress disorder, we look at schizophrenia, OCD, we even look at major depression. There is a bevy of mental health disorders. So, in looking at this, we look at the facts. The facts is that 42.5 million Americans are affected by mental health. And 1 in 5 of these individuals will experience a mental health disorder in their lifetime. How does this affect the African American community? We're 13.2% of the US population. And of that 13.2%, 6.8 million of us have a mental health condition. And we are 20% more likely to experience a mental health condition compared to other races. Some of the issues that we see post-traumatic stress disorder, we see ADHD, and yes, even suicide. Once upon a time, you didn't hear about African Americans committing suicide. The astounding fact is that 7.5 million African Americans are affected by suicide. But what's even more astounding is that there is another 7.5 million that's walking around undiagnosed. Some of the issues that lead to it: incest, employment issues, divorce, alcoholism. But primarily for African Americans, coupled with that is remnants of racism that still exist, and microaggression, which we face every day. When it comes to African American mental health professionals, we only comprise of 6% of it. 2% being psychologists, 2% being psychiatrists, and 4% being social workers. But here's the thing: most times when we walk into a place, there's no counselor that looks like us. We've already established the fact that African Americans are 20% more likely to have a mental health condition compared to other races. What does this have to do with it? Now we look at homelessness attached to it and violence, which exacerbates the issue. Some of the consequences that we have to deal with is suicide. Astoundingly, suicide is the third leading factor for causes of death among African American teenagers. Then we couple that with incarceration. When you look at incarceration, 2.3 million people, and 1 million of those are African Americans. Then 37% are drug-related offenses, but only 14% of African Americans actually use drugs. So we have this code of silence in the African American community. You better not tell anybody, you better not talk about it. It's taboo. They're gonna think that you're crazy. It's just something that we don't do in the African American community. Yet we're trying to get rid of the stigma and begin talking about it. So what prevents us is the lack of education, not knowing, or even when we walk in there, there's no one that looks like us. So we're reluctant to talk about it, especially being men. As men, we don't want to take away the masculinity to show that we are less than a man. So we turn to church. We turn to our grandparents. We turn to our pastors who may or may not know, may or may not be educated about it. Then we try to pray it away. Ultimately, we tell nobody but God. And in telling nobody but God, guess what? We take it to the grave with us. And then the generations that come behind us, our children, our grandchildren, they don't know that we suffered with a mental health issue. And as a result, it keeps on going from generation to generation. Also within the Black community, we always talk about not my child. My child is not crazy. They don't have a mental health condition. They also don't have a substance abuse issue. But what happens is they have an encounter with the law, and then a felony is attached to it. And in most cases, they end up wanting a felony as opposed to being labeled with a mental health issue. The modern day stressors, reality TV is a big thing. It's all over our networks, cell phones, and now we have the accessibility or the availability of drugs, including the pill mills. So what do? We want to talk about this issue. We want to highlight this issue. we want to say, you know what? It is okay to ask for help. It's okay. You don't have the authority. When we're able to talk about it, we're able to come up with solutions to be able to solve it. Currently, there's no best practices for treating African Americans with mental health issues. By talking about it, we can now come up with a best practice. And coming up with a best practice, we'll be prepared and ready to receive African Americans and provide the help that they need. I'm Dr. Chester Wilson. Thank you.
I would like to take this time to thank my coworkers and my peers for encouraging me to complete this journey. I am so excited that I had the opportunity to present for Elevate Daytona. It is an experience that I will cherish forever. Thank you for the opportunity.